The dust hung thick in the air as Martha Whitmore stepped off the stagecoach in Julian, California, her worn leather boots hitting the ground with a determination that matched the fire in her green eyes. It was April 1878, and she had traveled 300 miles with nothing but a single trunk and a letter from the owner of the Silver Ridge Ranch, offering her a position as a horse trainer, a job she had earned through reputation alone after breaking wild mustangs for a ranch back in Nevada that had since gone under. She pulled her wide-brimmed hat lower against the afternoon sun and surveyed the small mining town nestled in the Cuyamaca Mountains, its wooden buildings weathered but sturdy, the scent of pine mixing with the ever-present dust that coated everything in this part of California. The ranch lay 5 miles outside of town, and Martha hired a wagon to take her and her belongings up the winding mountain road. The driver, an older man with a tobacco-stained beard, kept glancing at her sideways as though trying to figure out what business a woman had heading to a working cattle and horse ranch. Martha ignored him, keeping her gaze fixed on the road ahead, watching as the landscape shifted from the dusty town center to rolling hills dotted with oak trees and granite boulders. She had learned long ago not to explain herself to men who would not understand anyway. When the wagon crested the final hill, Martha caught her first glimpse of Silver Ridge Ranch sprawling across the valley below. The main house was a 2-story structure with a wraparound porch, painted white but fading to gray in places. Behind it stood a large barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Horses grazed in the far pasture, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. It was bigger than she had expected, and more beautiful too, with the mountains rising dramatically behind it like sentinels. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the main house, and before Martha could climb down, a man emerged from the barn. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his blue work shirt. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar beneath a black Stetson, and even from a distance Martha could see the sharp line of his jaw and the confident way he carried himself. As he approached, she noticed his eyes were a striking shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the ocean, and they assessed her with an intelligence that made her stand a little straighter. "Martha Whitmore?" His voice was deep and rich, carrying easily across the yard. "That would be me," she replied, accepting his offered hand to help her down from the wagon. His grip was firm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked alongside his men rather than simply giving orders. "Ethan Jensen, I own this place." He released her hand and paid the wagon driver, who tipped his hat and departed without a word. "I appreciate you making the journey. Your former employer wrote me quite a letter about your skills with horses." "Mr. Patterson was generous in his praise," Martha said, brushing the dust from her split riding skirt. She had abandoned proper ladies' dresses for practical clothing years ago, much to her late mother's horror. "I hope I can live up to his recommendation." "I am sure you will. Let me show you where you will be staying." Ethan picked up her trunk, as though it weighed nothing, and led her toward a small cabin, set apart from the bunkhouse. "I had this built last year for my foreman, but he moved his family into town. It is not fancy, but it is private and sturdy." The cabin was indeed simple, just one room with a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a small stove, and a washstand. But it had real glass windows and a solid door with a lock, and after months of sleeping in boarding houses and shared rooms, Martha found it perfect. "This will do nicely, Mr. Jensen. Thank you. Call me Ethan. We are not much for formality out here." He set her trunk down and leaned against the door frame. "I should be honest with you, Miss Whitmore. I have 6 ranch hands working for me, and when I told them I was hiring a woman to work with the horses, they were not pleased. They think a woman has no place doing this kind of work." Martha felt her jaw tighten. This was not the first time she had encountered such attitudes, and it would not be the last. "And what do you think, Mr. Jensen? I think if you can do the job, I do not care if you are a woman, a Chinaman, or a trained bear. I need someone who can gentle these wild horses I bought from the Kumeyaay tribe and turn them into working animals. If you can do that, you have a place here." His gaze was steady and honest. "But I am warning you, the men are going to make trouble. I will not tolerate outright insubordination or disrespect, but they are going to test you. Let them test me, Martha said, meeting his eyes without flinching. I have been tested before. A slow smile crossed Ethan's face, transforming his serious features into something warmer. I believe you have. Get yourself settled in, and I will introduce you to the men at supper. We eat in the main house at 6. Do not be late. After he left, Martha unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare shirts on pegs beside the door and stowing her other clothes in the trunk. She had a collection of horse training tools, halters and long lead ropes, and a rawhide quirt she rarely used, preferring patience over force. She also had a small daguerreotype of her parents, taken shortly before they had died of cholera when she was 16. That went on the table beside the bed, a reminder of where she had come from and why she could never go back. At 6 sharp, Martha walked to the main house and knocked on the door. Ethan answered immediately, ushering her into a large dining room where 6 men already sat around a long wooden table. They all turned to look at her, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Gentlemen, this is Martha Whitmore. She will be working with the horses starting tomorrow. Ethan pulled out a chair at the head of the table and indicated Martha should take the seat to his right. Martha, this is Tom, Pete, Frank, George, Dutch, and Miguel. The men nodded or grunted acknowledgments, but none of them smiled. Tom, who appeared to be the oldest at around 40 with graying hair and a thick mustache, looked particularly sour. Pete and Frank were younger, maybe mid-20s, both lean and sunburned with the rangy build of cowboys. George was heavy-set with a round face and suspicious eyes. Dutch was blond and compact, his arms corded with muscle. Miguel, the only one who met her gaze directly, had dark eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. Supper was a simple affair of beef stew, biscuits, and strong coffee, prepared by a Chinese cook named Lin, who brought the food out and then disappeared back into the kitchen. The conversation was stilted and awkward, with the men talking among themselves while carefully excluding both Martha and Ethan from their discussion. Martha ate steadily, refusing to show any discomfort, but she could feel the hostility radiating from them like heat from a stove. Tom, I want you to show Martha the string of Mustangs tomorrow morning, Ethan said, breaking into whatever story Pete was telling about a saloon girl in town. She will need to assess them before she starts working. That is your decision, boss, Tom said, his tone making it clear what he thought of that decision. But I do not see how a woman is going to manage 20 wild horses that barely let a man near them. Then I suppose you will be surprised when she does manage it, Ethan replied coolly. Anyone else have concerns they would like to voice? The silence that followed was heavy and oppressive. Finally, Dutch spoke up, his voice carrying a faint German accent. No disrespect meant, boss, but the boys and I have been talking. We do not think it is right, having a woman doing a man's work. It is not natural, and it is not proper. Natural or not, proper or not, that is my decision to make, Ethan said, his voice hardening. Miss Whitmore is an employee of this ranch, same as you. You will treat her with respect and help her when she needs it. Is that understood? More silence. Then Tom said, What if we do not agree with that decision? Martha watched Ethan's jaw clench, a muscle ticking in his cheek. Then you are free to collect your pay and move on. I will not force any man to work somewhere he does not want to be. Maybe we will, Tom said, glancing at the other men. Maybe we all will. That is your choice. Ethan stood, clearly dismissing them. Think it over tonight and let me know in the morning. Supper is over. The men filed out, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Martha remained seated, waiting until they had all left before speaking. I do not want to cause you trouble, Mr. Jensen. If this is going to cost you your crew, perhaps I should move on. No. Ethan sat back down heavily, running a hand through his dark hair. I meant what I said. If they cannot work with you, they can leave. I have run this ranch for 5 years, and I have made it profitable by making smart decisions. Hiring you was a smart decision. Those horses need training, and I need someone who can do it without breaking their spirits. Tom and the others are good cowboys, but they are not horsemen. There is a difference. Still, 6 men is a lot to lose all at once, Martha said quietly. Maybe they are bluffing. Maybe they are not. Either way, I am not backing down on this. He looked at her, and Martha saw something in his eyes she had not expected. Respect. I have a feeling you are worth more than all 6 of them put together when it comes to horses. I hope I can prove you right, Martha said, feeling warmth spread through her chest at his words. So do I, Miss Whitmore, so do I. That night, Martha lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the evening. Horses whinnied in the distance, an owl hooted from somewhere in the pine trees, and the wind whispered through the eaves of her cabin. She thought about the 6 hostile men and about Ethan Jensen, who had stood up for her without hesitation. It had been a long time since anyone had done that, and she was not quite sure what to make of it. Morning came early, announced by the crow of a rooster and the gradually brightening sky outside her window. Martha dressed quickly in her work clothes, leather pants tucked into her boots, and a sturdy cotton shirt under a leather vest. She braided her dark hair into a single plait down her back and settled her hat on her head before making her way to the barn. The 6 ranch hands were already there, standing in a tight cluster near the corral. Tom stood at the center, his arms crossed over his chest, and when he saw Martha approaching, he stepped forward with the others flanking him like an army preparing for battle. We talked it over, Tom said without preamble, and we have decided we are not working with you. It is not right and it is not safe, and we are not doing it. If the boss wants to keep you on, that is his business, but we will be collecting our pay and moving on. Martha stopped a few feet away, keeping her expression neutral even as her heart sank. That is your choice to make. I am sorry you feel that way. Sorry does not change anything, Pete said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. This is a man's world, and you got no business trying to be part of it. I disagree, but I respect your right to your opinion, Martha said calmly. She had learned long ago that losing her temper never helped anything. I hope you find work that suits you better. Oh, we will, Tom said. There are plenty of ranches around here that do not hire women to do men's jobs. The door to the main house opened, and Ethan strode across the yard. He took in the scene immediately, his expression darkening. So you have made your decision? We have, Tom said. We are leaving. All 6 of us. Ethan nodded slowly. Then come up to the house and I will settle your accounts. You can be off the ranch by noon. Now hold on, George said, speaking for the first time. You are just going to let us go? Just like that? What did you expect, George? That I would beg you to stay? Ethan's voice was cold. I told you last night, if you cannot work with Miss Whitmore, you are free to leave. You have made your choice and I am honoring it. Now come get your pay so you can be on your way. The men exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by Ethan's swift agreement. Martha suspected they had expected him to back down, to choose them over her. But Ethan simply turned and walked back toward the house, and after a moment, the 6 men followed, their earlier bravado fading into uncertainty. Martha went into the barn to wait, her hands shaking slightly with the adrenaline that always came with confrontation. She heard raised voices from the house, Tom's angry baritone and Ethan's calm responses, but she could not make out the words. 20 minutes later, the ranch hands emerged carrying their bedrolls and saddlebags, their faces set in hard lines. They mounted their horses without looking back and rode out of the ranch yard at a fast trot, dust rising behind them. Ethan walked back to the barn, his expression unreadable. When he reached Martha, he said, Well, I suppose it is just you and me now for the horse training. Lynn cooks and maintains the house, but he does not do ranch work. I have a hired hand who comes twice a week to help with the heavy labor, but otherwise we are on our own until I can hire a new crew. I am sorry, Martha said, the words inadequate but sincere. Do not be. They made their choice, and honestly, I am not sure I want men working for me who cannot see past their prejudices. He managed a wry smile. Besides, now I get to see if you really are as good as Patterson said you were. Come on, let me show you these horses. The Mustangs were pinned in a large corral on the far side of the property, and as Martha approached, she could see why Ethan needed someone experienced. They were beautiful animals, all different colors and sizes, but they were genuinely wild, not just untrained. They bunched together at the far side of the corral, their eyes rolling white with fear and their bodies tense and ready to bolt. One large bay stallion stood at the front, his ears pinned back and his teeth bared in warning. That is the leader, Ethan said, leaning against the fence. I call him Thunder because that is what he sounds like when he runs. The Kumeyaay wanted to keep him, but I offered enough money that they agreed to sell. He is maybe 5 years old, never been handled by humans except to be captured and transported here. The others are similar, though a few of the mares have been around people before. Martha studied the horses carefully, counting them and assessing their condition. They were thin but not starving, their coats rough but not diseased. Most importantly, they still had fire in their eyes, that spark that made a horse worth training. They are magnificent, she said softly. How long have you had them? 2 weeks. I have been giving them time to settle and feeding them well, but I have not tried to handle them yet. That is where you come in. It is going to take time, Martha warned. Months, maybe, to get them all trained properly. And there are no guarantees. Some of them might never take to being ridden. I understand. I am in no rush. Ethan turned to look at her, his blue-gray eyes serious. I bought these horses because I believe they are worth the investment, the same way I hired you. I do not expect miracles, Martha. I just expect honest effort and expertise. The way he said her name, without the formal miss before it, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the horses. Then let me get started. I will need to work with them every day, morning and evening. And I will need your help sometimes, especially with the bigger ones like Thunder. You have it, Ethan said. Whatever you need. Over the next weeks, Martha established a routine. She woke before dawn and spent an hour with the Mustangs before breakfast, simply standing near their corral and letting them grow accustomed to her presence. She did not try to touch them or catch them, just existed in their space, sometimes reading aloud from the old book of poetry her mother had loved, sometimes singing the Irish folk songs her father had taught her. Gradually, the horses stopped fleeing to the far side of the corral when she approached. Thunder still watched her with suspicion, but the younger horses began to show curiosity, edging closer to sniff at her through the fence rails. After breakfast, which she usually shared with Ethan in the main house while Lynn fussed over them both and complained about not having enough people to cook for, Martha worked on other ranch tasks. Ethan was managing as best he could without a full crew, but there was always work to be done. Fences to mend, cattle to check on, equipment to repair. Martha threw herself into the labor, determined to prove her worth, and Ethan worked beside her without complaint. They developed an easy rhythm, communicating with few words, each anticipating what the other needed. In the evenings, Martha returned to the Mustangs for another session. This was when she began the real work, entering the corral with a long lead rope and endless patience. She started with the smallest mare, a pretty dun-colored horse with a white blaze, using approach and retreat techniques to gradually earn the mare's trust. It took a week before the little horse would let Martha touch her without bolting, and another week before she would accept a halter. But when Martha finally led her around the corral on a loose lead, both woman and horse moving in harmony, it felt like a victory worth celebrating. Ethan was leaning on the fence watching when Martha brought the dun mare to a stop and removed the halter. That was impressive, he called. How did you learn to do that? My father worked with horses, Martha said, stroking the mare's neck before releasing her. He was Irish, came over during the famine, and back in Ireland, he had worked on an estate that bred hunters. He taught me everything he knew before he died. I am sorry for your loss, Ethan said quietly. It was a long time ago. Martha climbed out of the corral, suddenly weary. But thank you. Join me for supper? Lynn made beef pie, and there is far too much for just me. It became their habit, these evening meals together. At first, they talked mostly about the ranch and the horses, safe topics that kept things professional. But gradually the conversations deepened. Martha learned that Ethan had grown up in Missouri, the son of a farmer who had lost everything when a flood destroyed their crops. He had come west at 18 with nothing but determination and a good horse, worked as a ranch hand for years, and saved every penny until he could buy land of his own. He had built Silver Ridge from nothing, and he was fiercely proud of what he had accomplished. In turn, Martha shared pieces of her own story, how her parents' death had left her penniless and alone, how she had worked as a seamstress for a year, hating every minute before a chance encounter with a horse trader had led to her first job working with horses, how she had moved from ranch to ranch, always searching for a place where she could truly belong. You belong here, Ethan said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. I know you have only been here a month, but I cannot imagine this place without you now. Martha felt her breath catch. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness, it is truth. He turned to look at her, and in the golden light of sunset, his eyes seemed to burn with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You have worked harder than any hand I have ever employed, and you have got a gift with those horses that borders on magical. More than that, though, you fit here. You feel like you were meant to be part of this place. I feel that too, Martha admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I have never felt so settled anywhere before. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, one by one, until the sky was brilliant with them. Martha was acutely aware of Ethan sitting just inches away, the warmth of his body and the steady sound of his breathing. She wanted to reach out and touch his hand where it rested on the porch rail, wanted to lean into him and feel his arm around her shoulders. But she held herself still, afraid to cross that invisible line between employer and employee, between friendship and something more. The summer heat settled over Julian, turning the hills golden and making the work even more demanding. Martha continued her training with the Mustangs, moving from the little dun mare to a leggy sorrel gelding, then to a stocky black mare with a white star. Each horse presented different challenges, different fears to overcome, different personalities to understand and work with. Thunder remained aloof, watching her work with his herd, but never coming close enough to touch. Ethan hired 3 new ranch hands, young men fresh from Texas, who were willing to work hard and did not seem to care that Martha was a woman doing horse training. They bunked in the bunkhouse and ate with Lynn in the kitchen, while Martha and Ethan continued their evening meals together. The new men were competent enough, but they lacked the experience of the previous crew, and Ethan found himself working even longer hours to keep the ranch running smoothly. One afternoon in late July, Martha was working with the black mare in the corral when she heard shouting from the direction of the main pasture. She quickly tied the mare to the fence and ran toward the noise, her heart pounding. She found Ethan and the 3 ranch hands gathered around a section of broken fence, and beyond the gap, she could see cattle wandering into the neighboring property. How many got out? She called as she approached. Maybe 20 head, Ethan said grimly. Someone cut this fence deliberately. This was not weather damage or an animal. Someone took wire cutters to it. Martha examined the clean cuts in the barbed wire, her stomach sinking. Who would do this? I have a pretty good idea, Ethan said, his voice hard. Tom and the others have been working for the Barlow Ranch, about 10 miles east of here. I heard in town that Tom has been talking about how I ruined this ranch by hiring a woman, how I am going to lose everything because of it. I should have known they would not let it go. What are you going to do? Martha asked. First, we round up those cattle. Then I am going to have a conversation with Tom and anyone else who thinks they can sabotage my property. Ethan turned to the ranch hands. Jimmy, you and Curtis start gathering the strays. Eddie, you ride into town and fetch the sheriff. Tell him I want to file a complaint about vandalism and trespassing." The men scattered to their tasks, and Ethan started toward the barn to saddle his horse. Martha followed. "I am coming with you." "No, you are not. If this turns ugly, I do not want you anywhere near it." "This is about me," Martha said firmly. "They did this because of me. I am coming." Ethan spun to face her, and for a moment Martha thought he would argue. But then his expression softened, and he reached out to cup her cheek with one calloused hand. The touch sent electricity racing through her body. "I do not want you hurt, Martha. The thought of anything happening to you makes me crazy." "Nothing is going to happen to me," she said, covering his hand with her own. "We will ride over there together, talk to them like rational people, and sort this out. If they are reasonable, maybe we can end this feud. And if they are not reasonable, then we will handle it together," Martha said. "But I am not letting you face this alone, Ethan. Not when it is my presence that caused it." His thumb stroked across her cheekbone, his eyes searching hers. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met." "I am aware of that," Martha said, managing a small smile despite the tension coiling in her chest. They saddled their horses and rode east, following the road that wound through the foothills toward the Barlow Ranch. It was a hard ride in the summer heat, and by the time they arrived, both horses and riders were coated in dust and sweat. The Barlow place was bigger than Silver Ridge, with more buildings and more land, but it had a neglected air that suggested the owner cared more about expansion than maintenance. As they rode into the yard, Tom and Pete emerged from the barn, followed by Frank and Dutch. All four men stopped when they saw Martha and Ethan, and identical expressions of hostility crossed their faces. "What do you want, Jensen?" Tom called. Ethan dismounted and helped Martha down, his hand lingering at her waist for a moment before he stepped forward. "Someone cut my fence and let 20 head of cattle loose. I am here to find out if you know anything about it." "Why would I know anything about your fence?" Tom said, but his eyes shifted away. And Martha knew they had found their culprits. "Because you have been running your mouth all over town about how I made a mistake hiring Martha, about how my ranch is going to fail. Because you and these other men left my employment with a grudge, and grudges make people do stupid things." Ethan's voice was level but hard as iron. "I am giving you one chance to make this right. You fix my fence, you help round up my cattle, and I will not press charges. But if there is one more incident, I will have the sheriff out here so fast your head will spin." "Press charges?" Tom laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You got no proof we did anything." "I have got the word of a man who saw you riding away from my property this morning," Ethan said, which was a bluff, but a good one. "I have got clear evidence of vandalism, and I have got a sheriff who does not take kindly to ranchers causing trouble for each other. So what is it going to be?" The four men exchanged glances. Finally, Pete said, "This is all because of her." He pointed at Martha. "You chose her over us, over men who worked for you for years. You brought this on yourself." "I chose competence over prejudice," Ethan said sharply. "I chose someone who does their job well over men who care more about tradition than quality. And I would make that same choice again in a heartbeat." Tom took a step forward, his hands balling into fists. "You are making a mistake, Jensen. Mark my words, that woman is going to ruin you. The only people trying to ruin me are standing right in front of me." Ethan shot back. "Now, are you going to fix that fence or not?" "Go to hell," Tom spat. "Then I will see you in court." Ethan took Martha's arm and steered her back toward the horses. "Come on, we are done here." They mounted and rode out of the yard at a steady trot, and Martha did not breathe properly until they were well down the road and out of sight of the Barlow Ranch. Her hands were shaking on the reins, and she had to concentrate on keeping them steady. "That went well," Ethan said dryly. Despite everything, Martha laughed. "Define well. No one got shot, no one got punched, and we still have all our teeth. In my experience, that counts as well." He glanced over at her, his expression serious again. I meant what I said back there. I would choose you over them every single time, Martha. You need to know that. I do know it, Martha said softly, and it means more to me than you can imagine. The sheriff, a weathered man named Carson, who had been keeping the peace in Julian for 15 years, rode out to Silver Ridge the next day. He listened to Ethan's account, examined the cut fence, and promised to have a word with Tom and the others. Whether anything would come of it was questionable, but at least the complaint was on record. The ranch hands managed to round up all but 3 of the escaped cattle, and those were eventually found grazing peacefully in a neighbor's field. Life returned to its normal rhythm, but Martha noticed that Ethan seemed more watchful now, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon as though expecting another attack. She understood his wariness, but she refused to live in fear. Instead, she threw herself into her work with renewed determination, spending longer hours with the Mustangs and pushing herself to make progress. By late August, she had successfully trained 8 of the 20 horses to accept saddles and riders. They were not fully broke yet, not ready to work cattle or make long rides, but they were gentle and responsive, and several of them had developed into genuinely affectionate animals who whinnied when Martha approached. The dun mare, whom Martha had named Rosie, followed her around like a dog, and the black mare, Midnight, would rest her head on Martha's shoulder and blow warm breath against her neck. Thunder remained the challenge. The big bay stallion had not become any more approachable, and Martha was beginning to wonder if he ever would. She tried everything, spent hours standing in the corral reading to him, left treats in strategic locations, even tried working with one of his mares while he watched in hopes that seeing another horse trust her would ease his fears. Nothing worked. Thunder kept his distance, watching her with those dark, intelligent eyes but never coming close. Maybe he is just not meant to be tamed, Ethan suggested one evening as they watched the stallion from the fence. Maybe he is too wild, too set in his ways. Maybe, Martha admitted, but I am not ready to give up on him yet. You never give up, do you? Ethan said, and there was something in his voice that made Martha turn to look at him. Not on things that matter, she said. Ethan reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her temple. What matters to you, Martha? Her heart was racing now, her breath coming faster. This ranch, the horses, you. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan's hand slid from her hair to cup the back of her neck, drawing her closer. I think about you constantly, he said, his voice low and rough. Every morning when I wake up, every evening when we sit together. I find myself making excuses to be near you, to hear your laugh, to watch the way you move. I know I am your employer, and I should not be saying these things, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel them. Then do not pretend, Martha whispered, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palms, matching the rhythm of her own. I feel it too, Ethan. I have been feeling it for weeks, maybe longer. I just did not know if you felt the same. I feel the same, he said, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and firm against hers. Martha melted into him, her arms sliding up around his neck, and everything else fell away. There was no ranch, no troublesome men, no wild horses. There was only this moment, this connection, this feeling of coming home that she had been searching for her entire life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I am falling in love with you, Martha Whitmore. I think I have been falling since the day you stepped off that stagecoach with fire in your eyes and determination in every line of your body. I am falling in love with you too, Martha said, her voice trembling with emotion. I did not think I would ever find someone who saw me as an equal, who valued my work and my skills. But you do, Ethan. You see me. I see you, he agreed, pulling her close again. And I am never letting you go. They stood there in the gathering darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, while the horses moved quietly in their corrals, and the mountains stood silent, witness to their declarations. Martha had never felt so safe, so cherished, so completely understood. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. The following morning, Martha woke with a lightness in her heart that made her want to sing. She dressed quickly and hurried to the main house for breakfast. And when Ethan saw her, his whole face lit up with a smile that took her breath away. Lynn noticed the change in their dynamic immediately, his eyes moving between them with knowing satisfaction, but he said nothing, simply served them extra large portions and refilled their coffee cups without being asked. After breakfast, Martha headed to the corrals as usual, but today she decided to try something different with Thunder. Instead of approaching his corral directly, she caught Rosie and led the gentle mare into the larger training pen. Then she opened the gate to Thunder's corral and left it standing open, an invitation without pressure. Thunder stood at the far side of his enclosure, ears pricked forward, watching this new development. Martha ignored him, focusing entirely on Rosie, running her hands over the mare's neck and shoulders, checking her hooves, adjusting her halter. She worked slowly and methodically, radiating calm and confidence. An hour passed, then two. The sun climbed higher, and sweat dampened Martha's shirt. Still she worked with Rosie, occasionally glancing toward Thunder's corral, but never directly at the stallion himself. She was about to give up for the morning when she heard the soft thud of hoofbeats on packed earth. Thunder had moved to the open gate. He stood there, half in and half out of his corral, his body tense and ready to flee, but his curiosity clearly overcoming his fear. Martha kept her gaze on Rosie, though every nerve in her body was aware of the stallion's presence. She started humming, an old lullaby her mother had sung, keeping her movements slow and unthreatening. Thunder took one step into the training pen, then another. Rosie nickered softly, and the stallion's ears swiveled toward the sound. He approached cautiously, testing the air, reading Martha's body language for any sign of threat. When he was 10 feet away, Martha slowly sank down to sit cross-legged in the dirt, making herself smaller, less imposing. The stallion stopped, clearly surprised by this move. Martha continued humming, her eyes downcast, giving Thunder space to make his own decisions. Minutes ticked by. A fly buzzed past. Rosie dozed in the sun, her hip cocked and her eyes half closed. And gradually, incrementally, Thunder moved closer. When his nose was just inches from Martha's head, she slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out a chunk of apple. She held it out on her flat palm, still not looking directly at the stallion, her entire body language communicating patience and peace. Thunder stretched his neck out, his whiskers tickling her palm as he delicately lifted the apple piece with his lips. Martha's heart soared. It was the smallest of victories, but it felt monumental. She offered another piece of apple, and Thunder took it more confidently this time. On the third piece, Martha risked glancing up at him, meeting those dark eyes that had regarded her with such suspicion for so long. Thunder did not bolt. He held her gaze, chewing thoughtfully, and in that moment Martha felt a connection snap into place. "There you are," she murmured. "I knew you were in there somewhere." Footsteps approached the pen, and Martha glanced over to see Ethan leaning on the fence, his expression stunned. Thunder's head came up, and for a moment Martha thought he would flee, but the stallion merely sidestepped closer to her, as though she might offer protection from this interloper. "Do not move," Martha called softly to Ethan. "Just stay there and let him get used to you." Ethan froze in place, barely breathing. Thunder watched him warily but did not run. After a long moment, the stallion lowered his head and snuffled at Martha's hair, making her laugh softly. She reached up slowly, giving him plenty of time to move away, and touched his neck. His skin twitched under her fingers, but he allowed the contact, and when Martha began to stroke him gently, he lowered his head further and sighed, a long exhale that spoke of tension releasing. They stayed like that for another 20 minutes, Martha touching Thunder with increasing confidence while the stallion gradually relaxed. Finally, sensing that she had pushed far enough for one day, Martha stood slowly and stepped back. Thunder followed her for 2 steps, then stopped and shook his head, as though surprised by his own behavior. Good boy, Martha said. We will do this again tomorrow. She led Rosie out of the pen, and Thunder watched them go before trotting back to his corral, his tail flagged high. Martha closed both gates and walked to where Ethan stood, unable to suppress her triumphant grin. That was incredible, Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. I cannot believe you got him to come to you. I was beginning to think it was impossible. Nothing is impossible if you have enough patience, Martha said, resting her head against his chest. He just needed time to realize I was not a threat. You are a miracle worker, Ethan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I am the luckiest man alive to have found you. I think we found each other, Martha corrected, tilting her face up for a proper kiss. Ethan obliged, his lips finding hers, with a passion that made her toes curl in her boots. Over the next weeks, Martha worked with Thunder every day, building on that initial breakthrough. The stallion proved to be intelligent and willing once his trust was earned, and he learned faster than any of the other horses. By mid-September, he was accepting a halter and following Martha around on a lead rope. By October, he allowed a saddle, though he was not yet ready to be ridden. Martha took her time, refusing to rush the process, and Thunder rewarded her patience by becoming increasingly affectionate, nickering when he saw her and seeking out her touch. The relationship between Martha and Ethan also deepened. They spent every free moment together, talking and laughing and learning each other's secrets and dreams. Ethan showed Martha the hidden valleys on his property where wildflowers grew in spring, the best fishing spots in the creek, the rocky outcrop where you could see for miles in every direction. Martha showed Ethan the subtle signs that revealed what a horse was thinking, the way their ears and eyes and body posture communicated volumes if you knew how to read them. In early November, as the weather began to cool and the leaves on the oak trees turned gold, Ethan invited Martha to ride with him up to the high pasture where he kept his breeding stock. They packed a lunch and set out mid-morning, their horses fresh and eager. The ride took them through pine forests and across meadows dotted with granite boulders, and by the time they reached the high pasture, both of them were windblown and exhilarated. The pasture was a bowl-shaped valley surrounded by mountains, with a small lake at the center fed by a spring. A dozen mares and their foals grazed peacefully, their coats thick and healthy as they prepared for winter. Ethan and Martha dismounted and let their horses drink from the lake while they spread a blanket on a patch of grass and unpacked their lunch. This is my favorite place on the ranch, Ethan said, biting into a chicken sandwich. I come up here when I need to think, to remember why I do what I do. I can see why, Martha said, gazing around at the breathtaking scenery. It is like another world up here, so peaceful and untouched. They ate in comfortable silence, enjoying the food and the view and each other's company. After they finished, Ethan lay back on the blanket with his hands behind his head, staring up at the impossibly blue sky. Martha curled up beside him, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her to hold her close. Marry me, Ethan said suddenly. Martha's breath caught. She pushed herself up on one elbow to look down at him, searching his face for any sign of jest. But Ethan's expression was utterly serious, his eyes full of love and hope and a vulnerability that made her heart ache. You want to marry me? She whispered. More than I have ever wanted anything, Ethan said, reaching up to cup her face in his hand. I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are my partner, my equal, my best friend. You challenge me and support me and make me want to be better. I love you, Martha, with everything I am. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Martha's cheeks, but she was smiling through them. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. Yes, Ethan, I will marry you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. You have given me everything I ever wanted, a home, work I love, respect, and most of all, you. Of course I will marry you. Ethan sat up and kissed her deeply, his hands tangling in her hair and Martha kissed him back with all the love and joy and relief flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time, drunk on happiness. "I do not have a ring yet," Ethan said, wiping the tears from Martha's cheeks with his thumbs. "I wanted to ask you first, make sure you would say yes before I went into town." "I do not need a ring," Martha said. "I just need you." "You are getting one anyway," Ethan said firmly. "And a wedding, and everything else you deserve. I want to do this properly, Martha. I want the whole town to know that you are mine, and I am yours." They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, their hands linked between their horses, grinning like fools. Lynn took one look at their faces when they walked into the kitchen for supper and let out a whoop of delight, immediately launching into a flurry of activity that involved opening a bottle of wine he had been saving and cooking an elaborate meal to celebrate. The three ranch hands, when they heard the news, offered sincere congratulations and insisted on standing Ethan to drinks the next time they went into town. The following Saturday, Ethan and Martha rode into Julian together to purchase a ring and make arrangements for the wedding. News of their engagement spread through the small town like wildfire, and reactions were mixed. Some people, particularly the older women who valued tradition, were scandalized that a ranch owner would marry his employee, a woman who wore pants and worked with horses like a man. But others, especially the younger folks and those who had struggled against convention themselves, were delighted and supportive. Martha chose a simple gold band with a small sapphire, and when Ethan slipped it onto her finger in the jeweler's shop, she had to blink back fresh tears. It was real now, undeniably real, and she was going to marry this wonderful man who had believed in her when no one else would. They set the wedding date for December 15th, giving them 6 weeks to prepare. Martha had no family to invite, but Ethan had a sister in San Diego who promised to make the journey, and several of his former employers and current neighbors agreed to attend. The ceremony would be held at the small church in Julian, with a reception afterward at the ranch. As the date approached, Martha found herself growing nervous in a way she had not expected. Not about marrying Ethan, she was absolutely certain about that, but about being the center of attention, about standing in front of all those people and making vows that would bind her life to his. She confided these fears to Ethan one evening as they sat by the fire in the main house. "I keep thinking about all those people watching us," she admitted, twisting the ring on her finger, "judging whether we are making the right choice. Some of them already think I am not good enough for you, that I am just a fortune hunter or a woman with loose morals." "Then those people are idiots," Ethan said bluntly, pulling her onto his lap. "And honestly, Martha, I do not care what they think. The only opinions that matter are yours and mine. We know what we have together. We know what we mean to each other. That is all that counts." "I know," Martha said, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I know you are right. I am just not used to this, to being happy. I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Nothing is going to go wrong," Ethan said firmly. "I'm going to marry you, and we are going to build a life together. And it is going to be wonderful, trust me." Martha did trust him with her whole heart. And on December 15th, when she walked down the aisle of the little church in a simple cream-colored dress that Lynn's niece had sewn for her, carrying a bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers, and saw Ethan waiting for her at the altar with love shining in his eyes, every doubt vanished. They spoke their vows clearly and firmly, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was tender and sweet and full of promise. The reception at the ranch was a lively affair, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Ethan's sister, a vivacious woman named Ellen, who looked nothing like her serious brother, took an instant liking to Martha and declared that Ethan had finally done something smart with his life. The ranch hands got cheerfully drunk and sang off-key songs. Even some of the townspeople who had been skeptical seemed to warm up once they saw how happy the bride and groom were. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Ethan swept Martha into his arms and carried her across the threshold of the main house, much to her laughing protests. They climbed the stairs to the bedroom that had been Ethan's alone, but would now be theirs to share, and there, in the soft glow of lamplight, they came together as husband and wife for the first time. It was awkward and tender and passionate all at once, and when they finally lay entwined in the aftermath, both of them knew they had made the right choice. Winter settled over Silver Ridge, bringing cold nights and occasional snow that dusted the mountains white. Martha moved her belongings from the little cabin to the main house, and they quickly established new routines as a married couple. She continued working with the horses, and by February, all 20 of the Mustangs, including Thunder, were fully trained and ready to be sold or put to work on the ranch. Ethan kept Thunder for himself, having developed a deep respect for the stallion's intelligence and spirit, and Martha was glad. She had poured so much of herself into winning that horse's trust that the thought of selling him to a stranger was painful. In March, Martha realized she had missed her monthly courses and began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be sure before telling Ethan, and when she finally shared the news over breakfast one sunny morning, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, then set her down gently as though she were made of glass. "Are you happy?" Martha asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ethan said, his hands cradling her still flat belly. "You are going to have my child, Martha. We are going to be a family. I feel like the luckiest man who ever lived." "I am pretty lucky myself," Martha said, covering his hands with hers. "I never thought I would have this. A husband who loves me, a home, work that fulfills me, and now a baby. It is more than I ever dreamed of." The pregnancy progressed normally, and Martha continued working with the horses through her 4th month, though Ethan fussed over her constantly and tried to get her to rest more. In her 5th month, she finally conceded that climbing in and out of corrals was becoming difficult and transitioned to other work, helping Lynn with the house and doing the ranch bookkeeping that Ethan had been neglecting. In late October, when the leaves were turning gold again, and the air had that crisp quality that heralded winter, Martha went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, attended by the local midwife and with Ethan pacing anxiously in the hall outside. But when Martha finally held her son in her arms, red-faced and squalling and absolutely perfect, every moment of pain was forgotten. They named him Thomas after Ethan's father and called him Tommy. He had Ethan's dark hair and Martha's green eyes, and from the beginning, he had a strong will and a stubborn streak that made both his parents laugh. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, taking turns walking with Tommy when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at him. Life settled into a new rhythm. Martha gradually returned to work with the horses, bringing Tommy out to the corrals in a basket so she could keep an eye on him while she trained. The child seemed to have inherited his mother's affinity for horses, watching them with fascination even as an infant and never showing fear. Thunder, surprisingly, was gentle with the baby, lowering his head to sniff the child and allowing Tommy to grab at his forelock with chubby fists. The ranch prospered. With the Mustangs trained and either sold or integrated into the working herd, Ethan was able to expand his operations. He hired more hands, good men who respected Martha and worked well under Ethan's leadership. The cattle operation grew, and Ethan began breeding horses in earnest, using Thunder as his stallion and producing foals that showed the intelligence and spirit of their sire, combined with the good temperaments of the mares. Tom and his friends made no more trouble. The sheriff had spoken sternly to them after the fence-cutting incident, and while they never apologized, they also never bothered Silver Ridge again. Martha heard through town gossip that Tom had moved on to a ranch in Arizona, and she was glad. She bore him no ill will, but she was happy to have him out of their lives. When Tommy was 2 years old, Martha discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in June of 1882, She gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after the little dun mare who had been Martha's first success with the Mustangs. Rose had her father's blue-gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she proved to be a calm, sweet-natured child who was the perfect complement to her boisterous older brother. The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Tommy grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk and showing a natural talent for working with cattle. Rose was quieter, but no less determined, and she had inherited her mother's gift with horses. By the time she was 5, she could gentle a skittish foal with nothing but patience and soft words. Martha and Ethan's love only deepened with time. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or misunderstanding, but they had learned to talk through their problems and never let anger fester. Every evening after the children were in bed, they would sit together on the porch as they had from the beginning, watching the stars emerge and talking about their day, their dreams, their plans for the future. In 1885, when Martha was 31 and Ethan 34, they welcomed a third child, another boy they named James. He was smaller than his siblings had been, arriving a month early and giving everyone a scare, but he proved to be healthy and strong. James had a sunny disposition and a laugh that could light up a room, and he quickly became the favorite of everyone on the ranch. Silver Ridge continued to grow and prosper. It became known throughout California as the place to buy well-trained horses, particularly horses for women riders, as Martha had developed specialized techniques for matching temperaments and teaching gentle but responsive manners. Ladies from as far away as San Francisco traveled to Julian to purchase mounts from the Jensen Ranch, and Martha gained a reputation as the finest horse trainer in the region. Tommy turned 18 in 1896 and took on increasing responsibility at the ranch, working alongside his father and proving himself to be a capable cattleman. Rose, at 16, was already training horses on her own, her methods even gentler than her mother's. James, at 11, was still deciding what aspect of ranch life he loved best, trying his hand at everything from cattle work to bookkeeping to helping Lynn in the kitchen. On a warm evening in May of 1897, Martha and Ethan celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them, with the children having agreed to make themselves scarce for the evening. They sat on the porch afterward, Ethan's arm around Martha's shoulders and her head resting against his chest, watching the sun set behind the mountains in a glory of gold and crimson. "Do you ever regret it?" Martha asked suddenly. "Keeping me instead of those ranch hands all those years ago?" Ethan pulled back to look at her, his expression incredulous. "Are you serious? Martha, that was the best decision I ever made. You changed my life completely. You gave me love, partnership, a family. Everything I have now is because you walked into my life and refused to be intimidated by a bunch of narrow-minded fools." "I could not have done any of it without you," Martha said. "You stood up for me when no one else would. You saw me as an equal when the rest of the world saw me as a woman trying to do a man's job. You gave me a chance, Ethan. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Ethan corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We built this life together, Martha. Every success, every joy, every beautiful moment, we did it as partners. I would not change a single thing." "Neither would I," Martha said softly. "Not even the hard parts. They brought us here, to this moment, and this is exactly where I want to be." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars they had watched together for nearly 20 years. The ranch was quiet around them. The horses settled in their corrals, the cattle grazing peacefully in the pastures, their children safe and happy in the house behind them. It was not the life Martha had imagined for herself all those years ago when she stepped off the stagecoach in Julian, but it was so much better than anything she could have dreamed. Ethan tightened his arm around her, and Martha snuggled closer, breathing in the familiar scent of him, horse and leather and sage. This was home. This was love. This was everything that mattered. And she knew, with the certainty that comes from nearly 2 decades of partnership, that this was exactly where she belonged and exactly who she belonged with. The evening deepened into night, and eventually they went inside, climbing the stairs to their bedroom hand in hand. Their children were grown or growing. Their ranch was prosperous. Their love was strong and true. Whatever challenges the future might bring, Martha knew they would face them together, just as they always had. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Years continued to pass in the comfortable rhythm they had established. Tommy married in 1899, bringing home a sweet-natured girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the far side of Silver Ridge property. When their first child was born in 1900, a little girl they named Martha after her grandmother, Martha Jensen held her namesake and wept tears of joy, marveling at how life had come full circle. Rose showed no interest in marriage, content with her horses and her independence, though she had several suitors who came calling regularly. She reminded Martha so much of herself at that age, determined and capable, and unwilling to settle for anything less than a true partnership. Martha suspected that when Rose finally did choose someone, it would be a man who truly understood and appreciated her strength, just as Ethan had understood and appreciated Martha's. James discovered a talent for breeding and bloodlines, spending hours studying the ranch's records and planning strategic matches to improve the quality of their stock. In 1902, at 17, he traveled to Kentucky to learn from some of the best horse breeders in the country, returning 6 months later full of ideas and enthusiasm that infected everyone around him. Ethan's hair had gone silver at the temples, and Martha noticed lines around his eyes that had not been there before. But he was still strong and vital, still working alongside his men and riding out to check the cattle. Martha herself had aged, her dark hair now threaded with gray and her hands showing the wear of decades of physical work, but she still trained horses every day and could still gentle the most difficult animal with patience and skill. In the spring of 1903, Thunder, who was now over 30 years old, began to fail. Martha spent hours with the old stallion, stroking his neck and talking to him in the same soft voice she had used that first day he had come to her in the training pen. He had sired dozens of foals over the years, passing on his intelligence and spirit to a new generation, but now his time was coming to an end. Ethan found Martha in Thunder's stall one evening, sitting in the straw with the stallion's head resting in her lap. He settled down beside her without a word, his presence a comfort as they both faced the inevitable. Thunder passed peacefully in the night, and they buried him on the hill overlooking the ranch, marking his grave with a granite marker that read, Thunder, 1873, 1903, a noble heart. He was the first, Martha said, standing beside the grave with Ethan's arm around her waist, and their children gathered behind them. The first horse that truly tested me, the first real victory I had here. In some ways, everything started with him. He was magnificent, Ethan agreed. Just like you. Life continued, as it always does, even in the face of loss. The ranch adapted and grew. New foals were born to carry on Thunder's legacy, and the work that had defined Martha and Ethan's lives together went on. They were grandparents now, with Tommy and Sarah adding 2 more children to the family. A boy named Ethan after his grandfather, and another girl called Lily. Rose finally married in 1905, choosing a quiet horse trainer from Montana named Daniel, who understood her need for independence and supported her work. James married a year later, bringing home a lively redhead named Catherine, who fit into the family as though she had always been there. On their 25th wedding anniversary in December of 1900, the whole family gathered at Silver Ridge for a celebration. The main house was full to bursting with children and grandchildren, laughter and music filling every corner. A photographer from San Diego had been hired for the occasion, and he took a formal portrait of Martha and Ethan, surrounded by their family, 3 generations standing together in front of the ranch house. When Martha saw the finished photograph weeks later, she traced her fingers over the faces of her children and grandchildren, marveling at the family she and Ethan had created together. She had come to this place as a solitary woman with nothing but her skills and her determination. And now look at what had grown from those humble beginnings. It was almost overwhelming. What are you thinking? Ethan asked, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. I am thinking about how blessed we are, Martha said, leaning back against him. About how one decision, your decision to hire me and keep me even when your ranch hands walked out, changed everything. If you had chosen differently that day, none of this would exist. I would have been a fool to choose differently, Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her neck. And I may be many things, but I am not a fool, at least not when it comes to you. Martha turned in his arms, looking up at the face she knew better than her own, the face she had woken up beside for 25 years, the face she hoped to see every day for the rest of her life. I love you, Ethan Jensen. More today than yesterday. More tomorrow than today. And I love you, Martha Jensen, he replied, kissing her softly. Forever and always. They stood together in the quiet of the house, the photograph of their family on the table before them, and Martha felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what happiness looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but this, a lifetime of love and partnership, children raised with care, work done with pride, challenges faced together. This was everything she had ever wanted, everything she had never dared to hope for. The new century brought changes to Julian and to California. The gold mines that had sustained the town were mostly played out now, and many people had moved away to seek their fortunes elsewhere. But Silver Ridge endured, adapting to the changing times by focusing more on horse breeding and less on cattle, taking advantage of the growing market for quality riding horses as more and more wealthy families from the cities sought country estates. Martha trained horses well into her 50s, finally stepping back from the daily work when her joints began to protest the constant bending and lifting. But she never stopped completely, always finding time to work with a particularly difficult animal or to teach her grandchildren the techniques she had spent a lifetime perfecting. Rose had taken over the main training operation, and she was every bit as skilled as her mother, perhaps even more so because she had learned from childhood rather than having to figure it out on her own. Ethan, too, began to slow down, though he hated admitting it. Tommy had effectively been running the ranch for several years, making the daily decisions and handling the business side of things, while Ethan provided guidance and experience. It was a good partnership, and it gave Ethan and Martha more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They traveled a bit in those years, taking the train to San Francisco to see the sights, visiting Ethan's sister Ellen in San Diego, making a memorable trip to Kentucky, where James was now managing a large breeding operation. But they always came home to Silver Ridge, to the mountains and the land and the life they had built together. On a crisp October morning in 1915, Martha and Ethan celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary with a quiet ride up to the high pasture, the same place where Ethan had proposed all those years ago. They were both in their 60s now, their hair white and their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work, but they still rode well and still took pleasure in being together. They spread a blanket on the same spot where Ethan had asked Martha to marry him, and they shared a simple lunch while watching the horses graze. The view had not changed. The mountains still stood eternal and magnificent. The lake still sparkled in the sunlight, but everything else had changed in the best possible ways. I have been thinking, Ethan said, reaching for Martha's hand, about how it all started, about Tom and those other men walking out because they would not work with a woman, and about how that moment, which could have been a disaster, turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. To both of us, Martha corrected, squeezing his hand. I gained just as much as you did, Ethan. Maybe more. I do not know about that, Ethan said with a smile, but I do know that I would not trade a single day of our life together for anything. Even the hard days, even the sad days, they were all worth it because I got to face them with you. We have had a good life, Martha said softly. Better than good. Extraordinary. We raised 3 wonderful children who have given us 7 grandchildren so far. We built a ranch that is known and respected throughout California. We worked together as true partners, supporting each other and building something that will last long after we are gone. Most importantly, we loved each other deeply and completely for nearly 40 years. How many people can say that? Not many, Ethan agreed. We are the lucky ones, Martha. The truly blessed. They lay back on the blanket, hand in hand, watching the clouds drift across the sky and listening to the peaceful sounds of the horses and the wind in the pines. Martha felt Ethan's thumb stroking across her knuckles, a gesture so familiar and comforting that it brought tears to her eyes. This man, this good and decent man, had chosen her when others rejected her. He had stood by her, believed in her, loved her without reservation or condition. She could not imagine what her life would have been without him. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? Ethan asked, turning his head to look at her. For everything. For taking a chance on me. For keeping me when your ranch hands walked out. For seeing me as your equal when the world saw me as less. For loving me, for giving me this life, this family, this home. For all of it, Ethan. Thank you for all of it. Ethan rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to gaze down at her. His blue-gray eyes, still as clear and sharp as they had been when he was young, were filled with love and tenderness. Martha, you do not need to thank me. You gave me just as much as I gave you. You made me a better man. You taught me what true partnership means. You filled my life with joy and purpose and love. If anything, I should be thanking you. Then let us agree that we are both grateful, Martha said, reaching up to touch his face, and that we were meant to find each other. I can agree to that, Ethan said, leaning down to kiss her. It was a gentle kiss, full of history and affection and promise, the kiss of two people who had loved each other through decades of joy and sorrow and everything in between. They rode back to the ranch as the sun began to set, their horses walking side by side, their hands linked between them. When they crested the final hill and saw Silver Ridge spread out below them, the buildings solid and prosperous in the golden light, the smoke rising from the chimneys, the horses moving in their corrals, Martha felt her heart swell with pride and love. This was home. This was their legacy. This was what they had built together from nothing but determination and skill and an unwavering belief in each other. And it was beautiful. Tommy met them in the yard, taking their horses with a smile. How was your ride? Perfect, Martha said, accepting Ethan's help to dismount. Absolutely perfect. They walked to the house arm in arm, and when they reached the porch, Ethan paused to look back at the ranch one more time. You know what the best part is, he said. We get to do this all over again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of our lives. I cannot think of anything I would rather do, Martha said, or anyone I would rather do it with. They went inside together, into the warmth and light of the home they had made, and closed the door on another perfect day. Their children and grandchildren would come for Sunday dinner tomorrow, filling the house with noise and laughter and life. The horses would need training, the cattle would need tending, the ranch would make its endless demands, and Martha and Ethan would face it all together, as they had always done, as they would continue to do for as long as they both lived, because that was what love meant. Not just the passion and romance of the early days, though those had been wonderful, but the steady, enduring partnership that weathered every storm and celebrated every joy. The choice to stand together, to work together, to build a life together that was greater than the sum of its parts. Ethan had chosen Martha all those years ago when his ranch hands refused to work with her. He had fired those men and kept her instead, not knowing what the future would hold, but trusting his instincts and his heart. And in making that choice, he had set them both on a path that led to this moment, this life, this extraordinary love. It was, Martha thought as she prepared for bed that night, with Ethan moving quietly around the room beside her, the best decision anyone had ever made, and she would spend the rest of her days being grateful for it, for him, for everything they had shared and everything they still had to come. She climbed into bed, and Ethan joined her, pulling her close as he had done for nearly 40 years. Martha rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and smiled into the darkness. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. Ethan replied, his arms tightening around her. Always and forever. And in the quiet of that room, in the house they had filled with love and family, on the ranch they had built from nothing, Martha Jensen closed her eyes and let sleep take her, safe and warm in the embrace of the man who had changed her life by simply believing in her. It was everything she had ever wanted. It was more than she had ever dreamed. It was quite simply perfect.